Clarissa's hand struck Luna's face with a sharp crack that echoed down the quiet street, silencing even the birds. My daughter's chalk, drawing a radiant blossom of lilac and gold, was smeared beneath her trembling fingers as she tried to hold back tears. I dropped the knife in the kitchen sink and sprinted outside, heart pounding, just as Clarissa raised her hand to strike again. Have you ever wondered what it's like to smile politely at someone who's slowly trying to erase your child from the neighborhood, one passive-aggressive comment at a time? Or how it feels to bake lemon bars for a community potluck, only to watch the HOA president discard them without touching them like they carried some kind of contagion? I didn't come to Briar Glen looking for trouble. I came for peace for my daughter. But trouble found us anyway. My name is Dr. Marisol Vega. I'm a federal civil rights prosecutor. I've built cases that held entire police departments accountable. I've taken on corporations for violating the rights of the disabled. But none of that prepared me for what was waiting behind the manicured hedges of our new home just outside Hartford, Connecticut. My daughter Luna is 11 years old and lives with muscular dystrophy. Her condition affects her muscles, but not her spirit. Luna is brilliant, artistic, and fiercely independent. She uses a custom, lilac-colored electric wheelchair, her pride and joy. It's fast, agile, and gives her freedom. And apparently, to the woman next door, it's a threat to suburban harmony. When we moved into Briar Glen, I had high hopes. The house needed work ramps, doorway, widening new flooring, but it was nestled in a safe, quiet cul-de-sac and zoned for some of the best inclusive schools in the state. It felt like a fresh start after the 2 years of grieving Luna, and I had spent since my husband Daniel died of pancreatic cancer. The first thing I did was have a wheelchair ramp installed, curving gently along the front walkway, lined with trellises covered in blooming lilacs and painted tiles that Luna helped design. It was not just functional, it was beautiful. Which is why it stunned me when less than 24 hours after the ramp was completed, Clarissa Thornhill arrived at my front porch, clipboard in hand, lips pursed like she'd just swallowed vinegar. "Mrs. Vega," she began, already wrong, but I let it go. I wasn't made aware of this new structure. "It seems a bit off theme for Briar Glen. We submitted all the permits and had HOA approval," I replied, handing her the signed document. "This ramp meets ADA guidelines and was reviewed by your vice president, Mr. Dawes." She stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. Her French manicured nails tapped against the clipboard. "I see. Well, Gerald should have run this by me. He knows better. We followed every rule. Even matched the paint code," I said, keeping my tone pleasant. "The flowers were my daughter's idea." Her eyes flicked toward the ramp, then narrowed. "It's just the purple. It's not exactly part of our agreed aesthetic. Wheelchairs are usually more neutral, aren't they?" I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek. "It's lavender. And it's medical equipment, not home decor." That was our introduction. Over the next few weeks, the campaign against us escalated, not with outright threats, but with tiny, corrosive gestures. Our mailbox was mysteriously unbolted one morning. A reminder notice was posted to our door about exterior ornamentation, even though we had none. I received a letter stating our mailbox numbers were half an inch too large. I fixed it. The next week, she said they were too small. I attended the HOA meetings, sat through her lectures about property values and community standards, and watched her avoid eye contact every time Luna's name was mentioned. One evening, she gave a 15-minute speech on how some people were bringing down the elegance of Briar Glen with unnecessary modifications. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one said a word. Afterward, I stood to leave, and Clarissa smiled at me with all the warmth of a winter sun. "You know, it might be less visually jarring if your daughter used the back entrance. Just a suggestion." That night, Luna asked me, "Do you think I ruined the way the house looks?" I hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. "No, Mia. You make it more beautiful." But inside I was boiling. Still, I didn't tell Clarissa what I did for a living. I didn't want my daughter's life to become a legal battlefield. I wanted her to have birthday parties with neighbors, school projects with friends down the street. So I kept showing up, volunteering, smiling, hoping. There were moments of light, like when Mr. Harold Easton, a retired judge who lived 2 doors down, complimented Luna's garden paintings on the fence, or when the Tran family invited us over for mooncakes during the Mid-Autumn Festival. But those moments were rare. Most of the time, Clarissa cast a long shadow, especially over Luna. She sent a formal complaint when Luna's wheelchair left tire streaks on the sidewalk during a rainy day. She called our floral mailbox wrap unapproved wrapping. And when Luna tried to participate in the neighborhood spring art contest with a watercolor painting of lilacs and butterflies, her entry mysteriously disappeared from the judging table. Still, we stayed quiet. I believed in fighting the right battles at the right time. That is, until the day Luna asked me why the other kids didn't want to play near our driveway. Their mom said I'm too different, she whispered, trying to sound like it didn't bother her. She said the ramp looks like a hospital entrance. My throat closed. I knew where that language came from. Clarissa, of course. That week I baked for the HOA potluck a tray of lemon bars, a family recipe. I watched Clarissa toss them into the trash without tasting one. I don't eat anything with artificial dyes, she said loudly enough for the room to hear, even though they were homemade with fresh lemon juice. I glanced at Gerald Dawes, the vice president, who had signed off on our ramp. He gave me an apologetic look but said nothing. Again. The silence was worse than the insults. The real pain wasn't in Clarissa's icy glares, it was in the complicity of the others. The way they avoided eye contact with Luna. The way they never asked how she was doing. They saw a ramp and a wheelchair. They didn't see the little girl who loved baking shows, who could name every constellation, who dreamed of painting murals on hospital ceilings one day to make patients smile. By the time June rolled around, I was tired. Not from my job, not from the long commutes to Hartford and back, but from pretending every day that my daughter's dignity didn't matter to the people around us. Still, I didn't crack, because I knew sooner or later Clarissa would go too far. I didn't expect it to happen with chalk, or with flowers, but when it did, when everything finally exploded under the bright sun of a Sunday afternoon, I was ready, because I had seen this kind of hate before. I had prosecuted it, and this time it wasn't just some case in a courthouse. This time it was personal. They say every storm begins with a whisper, a shift in the wind, a flicker of unease. And looking back, I realized the storm that changed everything started with a piece of sidewalk chalk. The morning after that HOA meeting, where Clarissa had smiled like a queen, surveying her court, Luna asked if she could draw outside. It was a bright Sunday in late June, the kind of day where sunlight feels like a promise. I said yes, of course, I said yes. She'd been carrying around a new box of pastel chalks for days, a gift from her art teacher, and she was practically vibrating with excitement. I helped her down the ramp, our lilac ramp, the one Clarissa called visual clutter, and settled her on the driveway with a bottle of water and a wide-brimmed hat. "What are you going to draw?" I asked, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "A blossom," she said, eyes sparkling. "Big, beautiful, maybe with stars in the petals." I kissed the top of her head and went inside to start lunch. Fajita bowl's her favorite. I chopped peppers and onions, peeking through the kitchen window every few minutes to watch her work. Luna was in her zone, hunched over with focused intensity, her hands gliding across the concrete, smearing and blending colors. Her wheelchair was parked beside her, and the entire driveway had transformed into a canvas, a swirl of lavenders, corals, and soft blues radiating outward in delicate petals. It was stunning, magical. I was halfway through marinating the chicken when I heard it. A voice, sharp, cold, unmistakable. "What do you think you're doing?" I froze knife in midair. The voice came again, louder this time. I said, "What do you think you're doing to our neighborhood?" I dropped the knife and ran. My feet hit the porch just as Clarissa's hand hit my daughter's face. The sound of flat, sickening slap echoed through the street. Luna gasped, her body flinching to the side. Her hat flew off. Her cheek turned crimson. And Clarissa Thornhill, the HOA president, the woman who cared more about mailbox symmetry than human dignity, stood over, her lips curled in disgust, one perfectly manicured hand still raised. "You little vandal," she spat. "This is community property. You can't just scrawl your little flower things all over it." I stood frozen for a moment. Not in fear, no, never in fear, but in rage, so pure, so cold, it felt like glass in my veins. Luna, bless her heart, tried to speak. "It's our driveway," she whispered, voice trembling. I was just. And then, as if that justified it, Clarissa hit her again. Harder. The second slap sent Luna sideways, chalk dust scattering like ashes. That's when I moved. Step. Away. From my daughter, I said, my voice sharper than any courtroom objection. Clarissa turned startled, but her expression quickly twisted back into contempt. You need to control your child, she snapped. She's lowering the value of this entire block with this mess. She gestured at the blossom mural, its petals now smudged by the chaos. Graffiti. That's what this is. Graffiti. This is art, I replied, stepping between her and Luna. And it's on our property. The HOA disagrees, she barked, crossing her arms. You people come in with your ramps and your bright wheelchairs and think the rules don't apply. There it was, not just ableism, not just classism, racism, that loaded phrase, you people. I felt something snap. Do you have any idea what you've just done? I asked, reaching for my phone. Oh, please, she scoffed. Go ahead, call your cousin, call the PTA. I run this neighborhood. I decide what's acceptable here. I hit record. No, Clarissa, I said quietly. You just committed felony assault. Twice. Against a disabled minor. In front of witnesses. That's when I noticed the crowd. Neighbors had started gathering on sidewalks, phones raised, eyes wide. One woman gasped audibly when she saw Luna's red cheek. An elderly couple stared in disbelief from their porch. And standing on his lawn in a Yale sweatshirt and worn brown loafers was Judge Harold Easton. That's enough, he called out, striding toward us with the calm authority of someone who spent a lifetime making people like Clarissa sit down and shut up. Clarissa stepped back from that child. Judge Easton, she said, suddenly flustered. You know how these people are. They bring drama. They never follow the be very careful, he warned. What I just witnessed is assault and battery. And given the victim's disability status, it may qualify as a hate crime under Connecticut law. Clarissa paled. You wouldn't press charges, not over sidewalk chalk. I wouldn't have to, he replied. There are at least 8 witnesses. Several have videos. Clarissa looked around. Phones pointed. Eyes narrowed. Her reign of fear was collapsing in real time. This is absurd, she hissed. I am the president of this HOA and I said, stepping forward, am Dr. Marisol Vega, Assistant United States Attorney, Civil Rights Division. Her mouth fell open. I kept recording. And you've just assaulted my daughter while making inflammatory comments about her disability and ethnicity. That's a federal hate crime. You're lying, she said, voice shaking now. You're bluffing. I pulled out my credentials. Want to keep talking? Clarissa stumbled backward. I didn't mean I was only save it for the judge, I said, dialing 911. Yes, this is Assistant U.S. Attorney Marisol Vega. I need to report an assault on a disabled minor. Yes, suspect is still on scene. The dispatcher confirmed officers were en route. Clarissa looked ready to run. Don't even think about it, Judge Easton said, positioning himself between her and the sidewalk. Fleeing would be a very bad look. I knelt next to Luna. Her lip trembled, but she was holding it together. She looked up at me. Is she going to jail? Yes, baby, I whispered. She is. Clarissa still hadn't moved. Her power, the illusion of it, was draining from her face. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, they listened to witness statements, reviewed videos, documented Luna's injuries, and placed Clarissa Thornhill in handcuffs. As they read her rights, she screamed about knowing the mayor, about being on the garden club board, about how she was just trying to keep the neighborhood presentable. Tell it to the judge, the officer said flatly. As the cruiser pulled away, neighbors began to step forward. One brought Luna a bottle of cold water. Another handed me a tissue. We saw it all, someone said. We're so sorry. But it wasn't just sorry, it was relief. As if they'd all been waiting for someone to stand up to her. As if Clarissa's tyranny had finally met its match in chalk and blossoms, and in a little girl who refused to be erased. That day something shifted, not just for us, for everyone. But I had no idea just how far the ripple would spread. Not yet. Not until the story started coming out. And not until the neighborhood began preparing for something no one had ever seen, before a chalk-covered revolution led by children and flowers and justice blooming right on the driveways of Briar Glen. The cruiser carrying Clarissa Thornhill disappeared around the bend of Briar Glen Drive, and with it the illusion that she was untouchable. As the taillights faded, a strange silence fell over the cul-de-sac, not the awkward hush of fear that had hung there for months, but something different. It was as if the air itself had shifted. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down now looked each other in the eye. Some lingered in clusters, whispering. Others approached Luna and me with tentative kindness. Someone handed her a bottle of cold water. Another offered a gentle, "We're with you." Luna was still shaken, but I could see the spark in her slowly returning. Her blossom mural, though smudged and marred from the chaos, still stretched across the driveway like a badge of courage. "It's not ruined," she said softly, her fingers brushing over the chalk lines. "I can fix it." I knelt beside her, brushing the hair from her face. "You already did more than that, Misha. You changed something bigger than this drawing." Over the next 48 hours, Briar Glen became a neighborhood unrecognizable from the one we had first moved into. Word spread quickly about the arrest, especially once video clips hit social media shared by neighbors who had quietly filmed Clarissa's tirade and Luna's assault. By Monday morning, the footage had been picked up by local news and disability rights groups who hailed Luna as a symbol of courage and artistic expression in the face of hatred. But what surprised me most weren't the headlines. It was the door knocks. Soft, hesitant knocks followed by voices I hadn't heard speak up once in the months we lived there. "I should have said something sooner," Mrs. Patel told me, wringing her hands. "Clarissa tried to block our home purchase, said our cooking would make the neighborhood smell foreign." Dr. Patel, a quiet man with kind eyes, added, "She told our real estate agent that our culture wasn't the right fit for Briar Glen." They weren't alone. The Yamamotos shared how Clarissa fined them 3 times for hanging traditional lanterns during Lunar New Year. A gay couple from the next cul-de-sac described how she denied them permission to rent the clubhouse for their wedding reception, citing an outdated clause that didn't exist. A black couple, the Whitmores, tearfully recounted how they were fined $200 for planting hydrangeas they'd grown for decades at their previous home. Flowers, Clarissa claimed, clashed with the street's visual standard. And then there was Mr. Ashby, an Army veteran in his 70s, who had tried to install a ramp for his wife after her stroke. "She told us it looked institutional," he said, voice shaking. "I ripped it out. My wife barely leaves the house now." With each story, the community's silence cracked, and then it shattered. The HOA board called an emergency meeting this time, not in the stuffy clubhouse with Clarissa at the helm, but outdoors under a large canopy at the community park. Over 100 residents attended. The board vice president, Gerald Dawes, visibly humbled and remorseful, opened the meeting with an apology. "We failed," he admitted. "We allowed one person's prejudice to shape our policies, our enforcement, and our culture. That ends today." The board voted unanimously to remove Clarissa Thornhill from her position, but the changes didn't stop there. A new interim committee was formed this time with purposefully diverse representation: 2 members with disabilities, 1 Asian American family representative, a black retired educator, and a local disability rights advocate. They promised sweeping reforms to HOA bylaws, stripping subjective aesthetic rules that had been weaponized and mandating 80 compliance reviews. They also approved funds to build a new accessible community garden, naming it after Mr. Ashby's wife, Eleanor. But the most touching moment came from the youngest residents. Inspired by Luna's mural, a group of kids gathered in front of our driveway with their own boxes of chalk. "We want to draw blossoms too," one little boy announced, "so no one forgets what happened." That weekend, more than 30 driveways in Briar Glen bloomed with chalk blossoms, roses, sunflowers, wild orchids, and yes, lilacs. Parents helped shade the petals. Teens outlined vines curling up garage doors. Even the Yamamotos drew a glowing lotus at the end of their walkway. The impromptu event quickly gained attention. Local news called it the Blossom Chalk Festival. The mayor dropped by unannounced, crouched next to Luna's wheelchair, and asked if she'd like to design the city's summer inclusion campaign poster. "Your artwork speaks louder than 1,000 speeches," he told her. As for Clarissa, she was charged with 2 counts of assault and battery on a disabled minor with a hate crime enhancement under Connecticut law. The case was airtight. Between videos, eyewitness testimony, and her own words on tape, there was little room for spin. Her attorneys reached out within a week, proposing a plea deal: 2 years probation, 500 hours of mandatory community service, at a children's rehab garden, court-ordered diversity and anger management training, and a 5-year restraining order, barring her from contact with Luna or our property. I let the DA handle it. I didn't want vengeance, I wanted transformation. Clarissa's fall from grace was swift and absolute. The country club dropped her membership. The symphony board asked for her resignation. Her husband filed for divorce. They sold their house at a loss and quietly moved out of state. The woman who once saw herself as Queen of Briar Glen left under the cover of night with nothing but echoes of her entitlement behind her. In contrast, something extraordinary took root in her absence. That chalk festival became an annual tradition. Every June, families gather with buckets of chalk, creating driveway murals in honor of inclusion, resilience, and art. They renamed it Luna's Bloom. This year, Luna was invited to City Hall to receive the Mayor's Award for Disability Advocacy. She wore a simple white dress with lilac ribbons in her braids. As she wheeled onto the stage, I don't think there was a dry eye in the room. She looked out over the crowd, neighbors, reporters, children holding flower posters, and said in a clear, steady voice, "Sometimes people try to paint over you, but blossoms still bloom through cracks in the pavement. And when they do, they make everything more colorful." That's my daughter, the little girl who turned a slap into a mural, a neighborhood into a movement, and a moment of cruelty into something no one could ever erase. If you believe in justice and in the power of community to rise after silence, don't forget to like this story and subscribe to our channel. We share real stories like this every week, tales of ordinary people standing up, speaking out, and making change. Thank you for watching. We'll see you at the next Chalk Festival. What happened in Briar Glen wasn't just about a ramp or a chalk drawing. It was about how everyday prejudice disguised as rules or standards can quietly chip away at someone's dignity until one day someone decides enough is enough. This story reminds us that discrimination doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through clipped smiles, withheld invitations, and weaponized policies. But even whispers can be silenced when a community finds its voice. The first lesson we hope you take from this story is simple but vital. Never underestimate the power of speaking up. Whether you're the person being targeted, the one witnessing it, or someone watching from the sidelines, your voice matters. If Judge Easton hadn't stepped forward, if those neighbors hadn't recorded, if the community hadn't eventually united, Clarissa might still be in charge, and Luna might still be shrinking behind her chalk drawings instead of blooming on city stages. Silence protects injustice. Courage, even quiet courage, breaks it apart. Second, remember that true inclusion isn't just about tolerance, it's about celebration. Luna's blossoms weren't just art, they were symbols of joy, expression, and visibility. Too often people with disabilities or from different cultural backgrounds are asked to shrink to blend in or to not cause a scene. But the world becomes more beautiful when everyone is allowed to color outside the lines, when ramps are adorned with lilacs, and when wheelchairs are painted with pride. To those who have ever been made to feel unwelcome in a place you call home, know this: you belong. You always did. And to those who may have stood by in silence before, let this be your reminder that it's never too late to become an ally, a friend, a defender of someone else's dignity. From our team at Us, Justice Stories, we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for taking the time to listen, to reflect, and to care. Every view, every share, every comment helps stories like Luna's reach people who need hope, perspective, and sometimes just the courage to believe that justice is still possible. If this story moved you, we invite you to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and most importantly, share it. You never know who might need to hear that blossoms can grow through the cracks, because when we stand together, even the hardest pavement can bloom. Thank you for being a part of our growing community. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay kind, stay brave, and keep standing up for what's right.